Princess Aurelia of the Red Veil stood alone on the high stone balcony, the wind tugging at her dark cloak and threading through her hair like an omen. Below her, the grand field was packed with spectators, nobles in embroidered silks, soldiers in polished armor, and common folk craning their necks to witness the ancient rite. The trial of claim was not celebrated with joy. It was endured, a tradition older than mercy, older than love. Aurelia had fired arrows since childhood, but today her bow felt heavier, as if it carried the weight of her entire future. She lifted the weapon with steady hands. The crowd fell into a hush so deep she could hear her own breath. By law, any man brave or foolish enough could step forward. If the arrow struck him, the gods had spoken. If it missed, fate had spared him. If it was stopped before touching the earth, then destiny was sealed beyond refusal. Aurelia narrowed her eyes and released. The arrow screamed through the air, sharp and unforgiving, aimed not to miss. Gasps rippled across the field as it descended with lethal precision. Then, in a heartbeat that felt stolen from time itself, a man moved, not away but forward. His hand shot up, fingers closing around the arrowhead mid-flight. The force drove him back a step, blood spilling down his palm. Yet the arrow never touched the ground. The world stopped. The man straightened slowly, unbroken, unbowed. He was tall, dressed not in finery but in worn black leather marked by old battles. His gaze lifted to the balcony, locking onto Aurelia's with unsettling calm. There was no triumph in his eyes, only certainty. "My name is Cale Blackthorn," he called, his voice carrying effortlessly across the stunned silence. "And by the law of this kingdom, you are bound to me." Shock crashed through Aurelia's chest. Her fingers loosened on the bowstring. No one had ever caught her arrow, not once. She had been trained to kill, not to hesitate. And yet this stranger stood alive, bleeding, and irrevocably tied to her fate. Murmurs erupted into chaos below, but Aurelia heard nothing. Her pulse roared in her ears as she stared at the man who had defied her skill, her will, and the future she believed she controlled. In that single impossible moment, she understood one terrifying truth. The arrow she loosed was not merely a weapon. It was a sentence. The throne hall erupted the moment Cale Blackthorn was escorted inside, his bloodied hand wrapped in linen, but his posture unyielding. Voices clashed like swords, nobles shouting outrage, elders murmuring prayers, generals demanding explanations. Princess Aurelia stood before the throne, her spine rigid, her jaw set hard enough to ache. She could still feel the phantom pull of the bowstring in her fingers, as if the shot refused to release her. "This is madness," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. The law was never meant for tricks or theatrics. He endangered himself deliberately. Kyle did not look at her. He faced the throne, eyes steady, as if he had stood there 1,000 times before. "I did nothing forbidden," he replied. I stepped forward. The arrow flew. I stopped it. The law speaks clearly. The eldest counselor rose, his face pale beneath his silver circlet. He recited the ancient words from memory, each syllable striking like a hammer. If the arrow was stopped before touching the earth, the claim was absolute. No refusal, no appeal, no exception, not even for a princess. Aurelia's breath came sharp, then changed the law. A murmur of fear rippled through the hall. Laws bound by blood oaths were not rewritten lightly. Breaking them invited rebellion, divine wrath, and the unraveling of the kingdom's authority. The king remained silent, his eyes heavy with a truth he hated as much as she did. Guards moved Kyle closer, up close. Aurelia saw the scars crossing his knuckles and wrists, the marks of a man shaped by war rather than courtly ambition. "You planned this," she accused, lowering her voice. "You knew I would aim to kill." Cale finally met her gaze. "I knew you would not miss," he said simply. "But I did not know you." The answer unsettled her more than defiance would have. There was no greed in him, no hunger for power. When the herald announced the binding, Cale's expression did not brighten. If anything, it darkened, as though the weight of the declaration settled heavily on his shoulders. The wedding was ordered, to take place before the next full moon, swift, unavoidable. Rumors ignited like wildfire throughout the city, each more vicious than the last. A mercenary prince, A cursed union, a blood omen. As Kyle was led away, Aurelia watched him go, anger burning beneath her shock. Her future had been seized in a single impossible moment. Yet somewhere beneath the fury, another feeling stirred, unease. Not because she was forced to marry him, but because she sensed that Cale Blackthorne was not a man who took fate lightly. And whatever he carried into her life would not leave quietly. Marriage did nothing to quiet the storm between them. The palace expected obedience, ceremony, and a softened princess. But Aurelia refused all three. She trained at dawn, as she always had, arrows striking targets with vicious precision, while Cale watched from a distance, silent and unreadable. When they spoke, their words were edged with restraint, like blades sheathed only by necessity. She did not trust him, and he did not ask her to. At night she learned his habits. Kyle rarely slept. He walked the corridors when others dreamed, moving with the alertness of a man who expected attack rather than rest. He trained alone in the lower courtyard, sword flashing under moonlight, each strike controlled, lethal, and born of experience far beyond that of a common mercenary. More than once, Aurelia paused in the shadows to watch him, unsettled by the realization that he carried himself not as a servant of the crown, but as someone who had once worn one. Whispers followed them everywhere. The court spoke of ill omens and cursed bloodlines. Some nobles refused to bow to Cale at all. Others watched him too closely, as if measuring the cost of his existence. Aurelia felt the tension coil tighter with each passing day, like the kingdom itself was holding its breath. The first attack came without warning. Steel rang through the west wing as masked men burst from behind silken drapes, blades aimed not at Cale, but at her. Aurelia reached for her dagger, but Kyle was already there. He moved with ruthless efficiency, taking blows meant for her, driving attackers back with precision that left no doubt. When it was over, the marble floor was stained red, and Kyle stood bleeding, breathing hard, his body positioned instinctively between her and danger. "Why?" she demanded as healers rushed in. "You could have let them take me. The law would have freed you." Kyle shook his head. "I don't abandon what I'm bound to protect." Later that night she confronted him again. This time his walls cracked. He told her of a kingdom burned to ash, of banners torn down, and a crown lost through betrayal. He spoke of exile, of surviving by the sword, of burying his name so deeply he almost believed it was gone. "I never meant to claim you," he said quietly. "Your arrow chose more than a husband. It dragged a war back into the light." Aurelia listened in silence, understanding dawning like a slow, dangerous fire. The man she was forced to marry was not her greatest threat. He was the storm her kingdom had awakened. Dawn broke beneath a sky the color of steel, heavy with the promise of blood. From the highest tower, Aurelia watched banners rise beyond the valley, enemy, standards long thought buried with history. The council's fears had taken shape, and Cale's past had found them at last. War stood at the gates, and the marriage meant to preserve tradition now threatened to tear the kingdom apart. The council demanded Cale's arrest before noon. They spoke of appeasement, of offering him up as proof of loyalty to the old alliances. Aurelia listened in silence, her hands clenched at her sides. When they finished, she stepped forward, her voice steady and cold. "You will not touch him." The room froze. She reminded them that the law binding her to Kyle also bound the throne's honor. To betray him was to shatter the very code that kept the kingdom united. On the battlefield, Aurelia stood beside Cale, not as a prisoner of fate, but as a commander. Her bow sang, arrows finding their marks with deadly grace, while Cale led the charge like a man reclaiming something stolen. Soldiers rallied to him instinctively, drawn by a presence that commanded loyalty without demand. When the enemy line faltered, Aurelia saw it clearly. This was not a mercenary fighting for survival. This was a king fighting for the right to exist. As the clash reached its peak, Kyle turned to her amid the chaos. "I will not force you to stand here," he said. "When this ends, you may walk away. The law took your choice once. I won't do it again." Something inside her shifted. The bitterness she had carried since the trial finally loosened its grip. "The law forced my hand," she replied, knocking another arrow. "What I do now is my own." They fought back to back, trust forged in steel and fire. When the enemy finally broke and fled, the valley fell into stunned silence. Victory had been claimed not by tradition, but by unity. In the aftermath, the council bowed, not out of fear, but recognition. Aurelia looked at Kyle, no longer seeing the man who caught her arrow, but the one who chose to give her freedom when he did not have to. The kingdom would remember the trial of claim as a turning point, not because a princess was forced to marry a stranger, but because two unwilling souls chose to shape their fate together. Beyond law, beyond fear, and beyond refusal.